Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to people in person and those of you online. Welcome to our first in a series of sessions on inclusive teaching. Today, we are going to focus on access and universal design for learning. But before we get to that, I just want to mention that there is a QR code on the screen that will take you to a folder with a PDF copy of the slides, as well as a bunch of other resources. A copy of the slides was also sent out by email yesterday, or if you can't find it, you can always contact either Kina or myself. Now, before we get into our content for today, I just want to offer a land acknowledgement. So I gratefully acknowledge that I was raised in Nogochiwanong, where the Russian waters meet. This is the treaty and territorial land of the Mississauga Anishinaabe in what is colonially known as Peterborough, Ontario. I wish to thank all First Peoples of Canada for their care for and teaching us about this land and all our relations. We are honored to live and work in the ancestral lands of diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Nehewa, Niitsitapi, Métis, Nakota, Haudenosaunee, Dene, Anishinaabe, and Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enhance our vibrant community. Miskwichi Waskagan, or Beaver Hills House, is governed by Treaty 6 and is part of the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4 in what is colonially known as Edmonton. And I promise that the captioning is much better when I'm not giving nation names. So hopefully this is helpful to people as we go through today's session. So for today, we have a couple of learning objectives. So the first half of the presentation is going to examine universal design for learning, principles, and applications. And then I'm going to pass it over to Kina, who is going to explore some strategies for supporting students with invisible disabilities and mental health challenges. For those of you that are on Zoom, please know that you can raise your hand or type in the chat at any time. If you have a question, and also to those of you in the room, you can ask questions at any time, though hopefully we will have some time for questions at the end. Okay, so universal design generally is based on the social model of disability that recognizes that when there are barriers, the barrier is in the environment, not in the individual. So if we can proactively design our environments appropriately, we can remove barriers that are unnecessary. So this is based on proactive strategies rather than reactive strategies. So for example, I have a picture on the screen here of a curb cut. Curb cuts make it easier for us to move from the sidewalk to the street or vice versa. This is especially helpful for people who are using mobility aids like a wheelchair or scooter or a walker, but they are also make movement easier for everyone. So it's a lot less likely that you will trip on a curb if there is no curb when you move from the street to the sidewalk. They're also helpful if you are pulling luggage, if you have a stroller, they're on an e-scooter for fun, etc. Okay, so we don't walk behind people or in front of people and reduce curb cuts. Before they access the street, these are things that we put in place in the environment ahead of time so that people don't need to be accommodated on a case-by-case basis. Now, universal design for learning is a collection of principles rather than a prescriptive list of changes that people might make to their course. So the three principles are as follows: multiple means of engagement, which gets at the why, or why should they care of learning. So why should your students engage with these learning tasks and how will it benefit them in the future? The second is multiple means of representation. So this is about what you would like the students to know. Now, it's not so much about changing the content of your course, but maybe changing how that content is represented or giving multiple options of that representation so that they can access the same knowledge in different ways. And the third principle is multiple means of action and expression. And this is about the how of learning, or how the students demonstrate their knowledge or skills in your course. Okay, so we're going to go through just some examples here of how you can apply these principles, and then I have a couple of scenarios where I would like you to tell me what changes you might make to remove some barriers. So for multiple means for engagement, one of the things that you might do to increase students' engagement or intrinsic motivation for completing the task is to optimize choice and autonomy. So one thing you might do is perhaps your students are doing a project, you can give them a list of possible project topics to choose from, or you can allow them to design their own project around questions that are important to them. So this might increase their engagement with that task because they can investigate something that they are really interested in. Another thing you can do to enhance engagement is optimize the relevance, value, and authenticity of your assessments. So authentic assessments are those that mirror the types of skills that students will demonstrate in the real world when they leave our program. Okay, so for a psychology student, doing an APA research paper is an authentic assessment because that might be something that they do in graduate school or in their research work. However, there are other types of authentic assessments that might mirror skills that students are demonstrating after they leave here. So many of our students will go on to jobs where they have to critically investigate some kind of literature and then summarize that literature for an employer, for colleagues, for patients, for students. And so there may be other authentic assessments like writing a press release or a funding proposal or a blog post or doing a podcast or something like that that you could do instead. Okay, now you can also increase engagement by clarifying the meaning and purpose of the goals. So explaining to the students why is it exactly that you're having them engage in these activities and how those skills are related to their real life afterwards or to the learning outcomes for the course. And finally, you can have students either individually or collectively do some reflection on their learning where they can see for themselves that they have met their goals or that their knowledge or skill has changed throughout the semester. Now, for multiple means of representation, this again is looking at the what of your course or what you want the students to know. And again, it's not really about changing the content, but maybe changing how that content is presented. So we might support multiple ways to perceive the information. So for example, today we have the slides, I'm speaking, we also have auto captions on. So these are multiple ways of representing the same information. You might present your students with a graph, but also give a verbal explanation of what they should see in that graph or how to analyze that graph. We won't talk too much about this here, but you can represent a diversity of perspectives and identities. We'll get into that more in our next session in September, where we focus on diversity and inclusion. Another thing you might do is illustrate concepts through multiple media. So you may discuss something in class, but then have a supplementary video that discusses similar information. Otherwise, one example from my own teaching is that I send students weekly digest messages that remind them of upcoming deadlines. And I do that through my LMS, so they get an announcement, but I also record a short video of me going over those same deadlines and link it in the same email. So students have a choice of either reading the text of the email or watching or listening to the video. Okay, and you can also make use of the connections and knowledge that students also already have by connecting prior knowledge to new knowledge. So this can actually shift or change their mental representations of the material, and that's more conducive to learning. So the third principle is about multiple means of action and expression. So this is how your students demonstrate their learning. So one thing you could do is include a variety of communication options. So you might have an option that students can communicate with you via email, but you also might have discussion forums, a Discord, various ways that they can interact with you or with other students. You can also vary and honor the methods for response. Now, this, of course, is dependent on what your learning outcomes were for your class. So, for example, in my methods class, when I have students do homework questions, they have to answer one homework question a week. I don't really care about their writing style or their spelling or anything like that. What I am interested in is whether they can apply the information, do the critique, create a research design. So to me, it doesn't matter whether they write the answer, record a video, record audio of them explaining the answer. So I give students these various options. They can even print out their homework and write on it and take a picture. As long as it's legible, I will accept it. Okay, now for other things like my learning outcome that they all design their own study, collect their own data, and write their own APA paper, they have to write an APA paper to complete that learning outcome. So I don't offer multiple ways of responding for that task. Okay, so it depends on your goals and the skills you want to develop for your class. You can also offer opportunities to review content or practice skills. This will enable students to better demonstrate the skills that they have in later assessments. You might also offer opportunities to do something like an error analysis or resubmission, where students have to reflect on what they didn't do correctly the first time and how they will make sure they don't make those same mistakes going forward. Okay, you can also enhance their capacity for monitoring their progress in the course. You can do this in various ways, using your LMS gradebook or using rubrics or checklists where they can check off that they've completed certain activities for your course. You might also break a larger project into smaller pieces where they can get feedback and make progress on different sections one at a time before they do the final submission. And you can also provide access to resources to deepen learning. So this doesn't change the response so much, but it does change how the students might engage in your material if you provide this extra resource that they can go deeper into their learning if they wish. Okay, so you might have gleaned now that Universal Design for Learning is all about flexibility, and there are various methods we have of introducing flexibility or maintaining flexibility in our courses. Some of these are technological. So we might use Zoom to allow students to come online as well as in person, or allow our students to use a chat instead of discussing things verbally. We can provide transcripts, recordings of class activities, might provide different ways of representing our material or allowing students to access that material afterwards. We can also take advantage of discussion forums, the possibility of having virtual student hours or homework sessions, and also using things like Discord where they can communicate with each other about their questions. Now, previous research has demonstrated that having high structure in your courses along with flexibility is actually conducive to better learning for all students. In particular, it is beneficial for students who are first generation students or who may not have had super high quality background education where they were taught how to study and things like that. But along with that structure, it really is important to put in flexibility so that you aren't creating barriers for students who might be more likely to encounter challenges along the way. So sometimes you can include flexibility or resilience in your course policies. So for example, in my methods class, students have to read 14 chapters and they do 14 quick online quizzes, but I only count their best 12. So this means if students are sick or do really poorly on one or two, then it doesn't devastate the whole grade. And I don't have to deal with any requests about extensions or make decisions about anyone's reasons for missing a quiz being legitimate or not legitimate. I also have policies about something I call OOPS tokens. These are also referred to as different things and used differently by different people. But for my classes, the OOPS tokens are imaginary tokens that I give the students that they can use for late submission days on assignments. They also can use them to do error analyses on quizzes to improve their grade or revisit problem-solving activities where their learning has changed. So it's totally up to you how many tokens you give students, how many you allow them to use on each assessment. If anyone has more questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. Okay, now one thing I want everyone to keep in mind when it comes to Universal Design for Learning is this +1 strategy. So for each learning activity, assessment, or interaction that learners have, try to provide one more way for that interaction to happen. Now, I will also encourage you to think about this as a +1 strategy for your course. So sometimes when people are learning about these inclusive teaching strategies, they think they have to do everything in order to do anything effective, but just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you can't do anything. So think about maybe what is one change, one resource, one choice, one flexibility option I can do for my course for this semester, and then maybe you can revisit that or add other things in the future. So think of your courses as being iterative. You don't have to do everything all at once. And you don't have to do anything, right? This is totally up to you and based on the outcomes for your course. Okay, so I have 3 scenarios here. We're just going to go through a couple of them before we move on to some other topics. So imagine that you are teaching a HyFlex course. So HyFlex, for those who aren't familiar, is essentially what we're doing today, where we have people present in person. We also have people present online. So how can you apply UDL principles to minimize the following barriers? So one barrier to learning you might have is that online students are missing the social component of in-person learning. Can anybody think of a change or an adjustment that you can make to minimize that barrier?
Make them come to class. Oh wait, sorry.
Okay, you could try to make them come to class. You probably wouldn't decide to do a HyFlex course if that was the goal. Julia?
Breakout rooms.
Yeah, you could do breakout rooms. So if you're having students interact in class to do some kind of activity in groups or whatever, you can also have your online students do those activities in breakout rooms. Now, sometimes people mention to me, oh, sometimes they're in a breakout room and they don't really do the activity or talk to each other. That can also happen in in-person classes as well. So it's not so much a feature of being online as a feature of dealing with different students and different levels of interest. So what about representation? This instructor is only using a PowerPoint to present new information. And what I mean here is just presenting the PowerPoint without anything extra that might be helpful. Can you think of anything you can do to present this information in multiple ways or give multiple opportunities for accessing that information?
Well, having, say, a recording or having the audio recorded or...
Yeah, okay, having an audio recording is one idea. Having captions to also present what you're saying verbally to the students. I also see that Chris is saying providing supporting journal articles. So there may be journal articles going over similar information or highlighting certain studies that you could provide to the students as well. And then what about for action and expression? This instructor is using only multiple choice and written response to assess students' learning. Now, without knowing the learning outcomes, this is a little bit challenging, but what do you think we might be able to do here? Okay.
In the chat.
So Chris is saying allow a verbal assessment. Okay, so depending on how students are submitting their work, you might be able to allow them to record something instead of give a written response. You might also include, even in an assessment that is mostly multiple choice, some kind of reflection activity at the end. You could also use some kind of peer review for the written responses as well, so they can demonstrate their learning by giving feedback on other students' work. Okay, for scenario number 2, imagine that you are teaching a synchronous seminar course with 25 students. How will you apply UDL to minimize these barriers? So for engagement, the classes are in person on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Is there anything that you could do to minimize this barrier? This is just what you might do, not what you will do for your future classes.
HyFlex.
Yeah, you could do it as HyFlex. Anything else? Maybe imagine what happens if a student is ill or has to miss a class.
Have recordings that they could request?
So you might have recordings that they can request. You might also, and this is getting a little into action and expression, but you might have other ways that they can engage with the same material, like maybe the same readings, and present that information, or they can post that information online on a discussion forum. So I see Crystal is saying post lecture notes with a recording following the class. Now, in my seminar class, I don't record because the point of my seminar classes is for the students to discuss the material, and I want them to be free to have those discussions and make their comment and maybe make some mistakes. And I don't want them to worry about that being recorded forever for everyone in the class. But you could, in addition to doing things HyFlex, you could give these other opportunities where students are demonstrating the same learning or engaging with the material in different ways. Now, what about representation? You only have PDFs of the readings available and you have 3 readings per week. And anybody think of how they might think about a student who might have challenges in looking at a screen for the amount of time it would take to get through 3 readings? Julia?
Like audiobook versions of the text.
Okay, there might be audiobook versions of the textbook. You also could provide a link to a screen reader, for example. You could provide this for all students. So students who have challenges with looking at a screen that long can use it, but so can other students as well. Okay, now in my seminar class, I do assign 3 readings per week, but sometimes one of the readings is a podcast or a video of researchers discussing similar ideas, and I also give them a choice. So I tell each student they can do 2 of the 3 readings that are assigned. So they have some choice, but they're all coming to the same seminar. We'll discuss issues from all 3, so they're still engaging with all of those ideas. Okay, and for action and expression, so I kind of touched on this already. So participation is scored based on verbal participation. If you decided to go with the HyFlex route, you could also have students participate in the chat. Another thing I've done with my seminars is students can enhance their participation for the day by presenting a post on the discussion forum within a day after the discussion, summarizing the 3 main themes that were discussed. So they can't just repeat what was said in the discussion, they have to think about and critically analyze what we discussed and discuss the themes that emerged. Okay, so that's another way they can enhance their participation. For students who are ill, I also allow them to respond to other students' discussion questions that are already on a forum, so they can do that for their participation for a couple of weeks during the semester. Okay, now let's imagine you have students doing a paper synthesizing existing research and proposing new ideas. Is there some other way they might be able to demonstrate some of the same skills, but maybe doing a different format of assessment?
A presentation of the same stuff could probably fill the same role.
Yeah. Okay, so, and again, this totally depends on your learning outcomes for the assessment. So if your learning outcomes are focused on them developing their scientific writing skills, then maybe you still want to go with that paper. Okay, however, if that's not a primary concern, if your primary concern is their ability to synthesize the research and propose something new, then maybe instead of a paper, they could do, recorded presentation, they could do a poster presentation, they could do a podcast, or something like that. Okay, and it's up to you to give them limits on, how long these things are, and please, please, please give them limits from the very beginning that are relatively short, because otherwise you will have lots of 1 hour long podcasts to listen to. I say from previous experience. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip this third scenario. Now, of course, there are some barriers to universal design for learning. Often people mention time as barriers, so it takes time to create some of these additional resources or to write up a particular policy for your syllabus. However, speaking from my experience, a lot of these policies and other changes can save time. So I, for example, don't deal with a lot of emails about extensions or other formats of my materials or having to miss a class or things like that, because the policies already take care of it. Also, because I use OOPS tokens, if a student emails me about needing an extension, I don't have to hem and haw about whether their reason is legitimate or how I respond to that, because they have the OOPS tokens. Everyone has them. I can just respond yes, because this is already taken care of in our course policy. Okay, another barrier to using universal design for learning is knowledge and support. And I'm going to offer up Tina and myself as resources for how you might think about using universal design in your classes, but also in the folder that we have linked with our QR code. You have these two resources. So you have a list of the UDL guidelines from CAST, and you also have this OER, a PDF of this OER, from eCampus Ontario, that's all about universal design for learning and using these principles to make your classes more inclusive, equitable, accessible, and increasing their diversity. Okay. Now, just a couple other things that I want to mention before I pass it off to Kina. So one thing is universal time multipliers, or UTMs. You might have heard about this in a recent CTL discussion, but I'm just going to talk about this briefly here, though there will be a link to a CTL tip sheet that has a lot more information. So these are instructor-initiated built-in time extensions. So instead of accommodating students who have time extensions on a student-by-student basis, you apply the time extension to everyone in the course. Now, what this means is that students who only have a time extension accommodation do not have to write their assessments with accommodation services. They can still do the same exam or the same quiz or activity in the class with the other students. Now, of course, if a student has other accommodations, like they need to be in a smaller room or, have their exam on a different color paper or have a barrier between them and other students, then employing a UTM in no way prevents those students from accessing those accommodations. But you should know that most of the students who get accommodations have a time multiplier, and that's it. Okay, now, so because the students can still write the assessments or do the activities with the other students, this fosters inclusion. Also, using UTMs decreases labor, so it might decrease labor for you. So for example, if you have online assessments and you have to go and put in overrides for every student or for their time multipliers, that's time that you could be using for other activities. It also decreases the navigational labor for the students. Not only do they have to navigate accommodation services to get their accommodations approved, but then they have other steps they have to follow, like registering for exams and things like that. Another thing to think of is that there can be systemic barriers to even getting accommodations approved in the first place. So by employing UTMs, you're accommodating those students as well. This universal time multipliers also decrease the impact of skills that are unrelated to the course outcomes on student performance. So these skills might be, being able to read really quickly or being able to calm yourself down really fast. There are students who have told me they really appreciate the extra time because English is not their first language and they do sort of a translation in their head. That's something we don't accommodate through accommodation services. I can tell you that, of course, there are some learning outcomes that may be time dependent. So people often bring up, in nursing, you might have to do certain things in a certain amount of time. But I can tell you that the Faculty of Nursing, for at least the last 5 years, has applied a 1.5 multiplier to all midterms and final exams in the whole faculty. Okay, so this link, which is active in the PDF that we shared, goes to the tip sheet from CETL. They have resources like syllabus language, some things to consider in whether UTM is appropriate for your class, and different ways that you might enact it. So Jeff is saying there are also types of exams that don't require examinations or accommodation. Example, a take-home exam with a 24-hour window. That is correct. So, and one thing I can tell you that helps is if you tell the students how long the assessment is designed to take and then tell them how much time they're given, they can see that they are given this time multiplier in advance. Okay, now I'm not going to go through all of these links, but they are in the PDF. These are things that might be useful for you and for your students. I highly recommend subscribing to the Wellness in the Classroom supports for instructors. They send you supports that you can share with your students every month, and sometimes you learn about things like one-at-a-time therapy or the wellness support social workers that I didn't know about until I subscribed to these resources. One thing I did want to point out is it can be a good idea to put a wellness statement in your syllabus. So this is an example wellness statement from one of my syllabi. Now, one thing I want to point out is that often in a syllabus for psychology, you might see something like a content warning about the type of content that's in the class and how this might be distressing or emotionally challenging for certain students. Often what happens is we present a content warning and then that's it. And if students are having, challenging moment with that type of content while they're in the middle of class or in the middle of an exam, some people's response to that is, well, book a therapy appointment or something, but that doesn't actually help them in the moment. So what might help them in the moment is to provide them in advance with some grounding strategies, which Kina will talk about in the second half. Okay, sorry I took way too long reviewing the quick thing.
All right, folks, please let me know if my voice is starting to wane a little bit. I'm on the tail end of sick, had class this morning, so it's fading a little. And then thank you, Jen, for overview on UDL and some more and different strategies that we can take into account for UDL in our classes. We have a few more things that we're going to cover, a little bit on invisible disabilities and then also mental health. And we're going to focus on how we can align these kinds of challenges with EDI principles while leveraging UDL to create more inclusive learning environments. So I'm hoping we can create an understanding of invisible disabilities, how they can impact learning, and share some practical strategies to support students using these UDL principles, and then make a clear connection with those things and EDI. So 2 big topics, invisible disabilities, mental health challenges. So briefly recapping here, just that the thing for us to keep in mind is that UDL involves removing barriers to learning, including barriers that aren't visible to us. Something we can do is help ensure that our students aren't overlooked, including those with invisible needs. So the 3 UDL principles, multiple means of engagement, representation, action, expression, are going to be key to addressing these kinds of challenges. So first things first, what is an invisible disability? Here we're talking about disabilities that aren't immediately apparent to others. So this could include things like mental health conditions, something like an anxiety disorder, depression. It could be a neurodevelopmental condition, something like ADHD or autism, even a learning difference, something like dyslexia, or chronic illness, chronic fatigue syndrome, some sort of chronic pain syndrome. According to the Canadian Survey on Disabilities, the CSD, approximately 22% of post-secondary students in Canada have reported having one or more of these disabilities, including invisible disabilities. So translating roughly to about 1 in 5 post-secondary students, and those are just the students who are diagnosed or have reported that they have an invisible or visible disability. So what we can observe in these students, it's just this tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, students can be managing daily pain and fatigue, very complex medical routines, mental health challenges that could come with that, sensory sensitivities, and executive functioning difficulties, which will come up quite a bit here. But these barriers can lead to some common myths. The idea that if I can't see it, it's not real. Invisible disabilities are legally recognized. They're protected under the Canadian human rights legislation, including the Canadian Human Rights Act and provincial human rights codes. So they're just as valid, just as real as visible disabilities, even if they're not immediately apparent. The other big myth, accommodations lead to unfair advantages. Accommodations are more about creating equal access by removing different barriers. So they level the playing field rather than providing an advantage. Think about it the same way quite a few of us wear glasses. I think everyone but Ben, actually. But if someone needs glasses to read, we don't consider that an unfair advantage over someone who doesn't need them. It's just another way for us to make sure that everyone is getting an opportunity to have that same level of access. The other thing to remember with that is that disability can affect anybody at any time in their life. Many people are temporarily able-bodied. It could be a temporary injury, a chronic condition, something that happens over time, or just something that emerges when we're very stressed. So that line between disabled and non-disabled isn't fixed. Like a lot of things in life, we don't always have that binary, and that's why creating accessible, inclusive environments are going to be something that can really benefit everybody. So while invisible disabilities, including mental health conditions, can be misunderstood or overlooked, the good news is that we can use these UDL principles to create learning environments that proactively support ourselves and our students. If we're considering why this matters, if we're thinking specifically mental health challenges that can affect your learning, your attention, your motivation, again, that big one, executive functioning, and the benefits are going to be helpful for everyone. Reduce stress for the students, reduce stress for the instructors, better learning outcomes, increase student engagement, and a stronger sense of community in the classroom. I think we have all maybe had this experience of academic settings often having very tight deadlines, high expectations, very intense workloads, and many students can struggle with these feelings of inadequacy when they're faced with these kinds of challenges. And that can be more pronounced for someone with a disability or an invisible disability. So that competitive nature can lead to social isolation, particularly for individuals who are already feeling marginalized due to their disability. So students in academics can struggle, again, with different things like the functioning, time management, sensory overload, and that can make it difficult to do things like attend class, meet expectations, participate even. So students may need accommodations to access and demonstrate their knowledge effectively. So with that why, now what can we do? I'm going to introduce a few options here, and then we're going to get into a few more options with just a specific case study. So one thing we can do, also reinforcing some of the things that Jen's already talked about, we can make participation accessible. So focused on action and expression, the how. Allow students to choose between different assessments, visual assessments, oral assessments, written assessments. So creating assignments with different demands, even different social demands. So some group work, but also some individual work, and potentially, depending on their learning outcomes, choice there. Allowing students to kind of have a choice can also be really helpful here. For engagement, the why, we can include community building practices. So like grounding activities and more. I put this link here. I'm hoping this doesn't make everything just crash. This is a PDF that's in that folder. It's something that I give the students on day one, a little introduction to grounding. So what are grounding activities and how do they work? So it talks a little bit about what's happening in their bodies when they're experiencing very high moments of stress, gives them a little bit of the research there, and then has a bunch of different examples of grounding activities that they can do on their own. And we really try to emphasize that, yes, when you're having like a really high, intense moment in your life, it's great to turn to these, but we also really focus on that resiliency. So doing these when things are going really well too, so that when you do have that really stressful moment, your body is prepared, your mind is prepared. And then in some classes, like smaller classes, we'll even start class with some of these sometimes, just to kind of create that division between, yes, there's all these things happening in your life, but now we're here together in our classroom, in our community, and we're going to focus on this. There are other things like beginning classes with very brief, just check-in activities, just seeing how the students are doing emotionally, see how their days are going, what's happening right now in their lives, creating structured but optional study groups, using collaborative note-taking systems where students can contribute according to their strengths. So allowing like a pool for students to contribute notes for each other to help each other out. There's also community agreements, something we'll talk about in a later session, but essentially putting together, I don't want to call them a bunch of rules for class, but just like things that we want to keep in mind in terms of how we're going to create community together, how we're going to conduct ourselves together. What are we going to do when conflict does come up so that everyone is prepared? No one has any sort of surprises and they're unsure about what to do if something happened in class that they didn't like, that didn't work. And then representation. What I want to add here is introduce the idea of cognitive load management. So cognitive load management, it's going to address how instructors can present information in ways that optimize learning. It reduces unnecessary mental burden, and it supports students' processing. So this is particularly beneficial for students with invisible disabilities, something that might affect their information processing, attention, working memory, again, that executive functioning. So things like content segmentation, breaking lectures down into 10 to 15-minute segments with very clear transitions in terms of how is this building up? Why are we now on this slide? Where are we? How did we get here? What's the whole point of what we're doing? That very important why. Why are we learning this? Dividing, kind of what Jen said, reading segments maybe. If you have 3 readings a week, try to break those up, give them clear deadlines and guidelines in terms of how to approach reading this kind of material. Maybe even dividing a large reading into smaller sections with some guiding questions between the sections. So instead of a 30-page reading, divide it into 10-page sections and give some reflection prompts in between to help guide that process, that why. Why am I reading this? Excuse me, what should I be getting from this? So this structure is helpful in that way, or otherwise just like something like building blocks. So maybe each class session you add in 1 or 2 elements, giving students a chance to see how, again, this is building on itself. And that also gives them a chance to kind of check in with themselves, do some reflection. If maybe I got everything one class and now all of a sudden I'm lost, that helps them identify where that gap in knowledge is and gives them that ability to find those answers. So it reduces working memory overload. It provides natural points for processing. It allows students to track their own progress and their own achievement in very manageable increments. It works well when you incorporate it, cognitive load management, with other UDL principles. But then I think I'm going to skip that part for now, but just adding in normalizing help seeking. So Jen gave us some really great resources, and those are going to be in the PDF as well. So on-campus mental health services, counseling services, providing critical support for students who do have mental health challenges, creating space for individuals to share their experiences, support one another can also reduce feelings of isolation, foster that greater sense of community, educating ourselves about invisible disabilities, mental health conditions. We could turn to those grounding activities again, so making sure we're all on the same page there. Inclusive learning statements are something we're going to talk about in a later section. But an inclusive learning statement, it's something that you can see in your syllabus. It's a formal declaration that communicates your commitment to creating an equitable, accessible, supportive learning environment for your students. So it establishes the classroom as a space where diversity is valued, that all students belong. So taking some time to go through that with the students and pointing it out to them. Other things, you can create a dedicated support resources section in your syllabus. We already kind of have that with our template in terms of the student resources at the end of our syllabus template. You could add more there. You could flesh that out a little bit more. You could put that into a separate section called student support or supporting your success. Putting some more links, some more QR codes, giving the students those kinds of resources, but also explaining when they might need these resources, showing them the process of seeking out these kinds of resources. If it's particularly relevant to your class, and I think the bigger thing is if you have the time to do it, you could incorporate these into assignments even. You could incorporate a resource navigation challenge early in the semester where students locate, evaluate these kinds of campus support services that they might potentially use and incorporate it that way. And on the left there is a screenshot from my Canvas page. So you can also just make these more accessible. So in Canvas, when they log in the front page, they see important contact information, class information, but then they also see health resources. So it's right there as soon as they log in if they need it. So each of these strategies are going to support that UDL framework by removing barriers to help seeking. It gives them multiple pathways for them to engage in these support systems based on their own needs. In terms of respecting accommodations, I think here I just wanted to remind us that education is a human right. Every student deserves quality education. Learning differences, disabilities shouldn't be the barriers to their education. Diverse perspectives are what are really good for our community, and accommodations help break down these kinds of systematic barriers. Dominant education systems, we know, were built on a very narrow definition of the typical learner. So many standard practices can unintentionally or sometimes intentionally exclude students. So accommodations can show students, allow students to show their true capabilities and focus on learning, not just having to manage obstacles while trying to learn at the same time. So we're professionals. Our role is to support all learners, not create unnecessary challenges for students. Research shows that accommodations improve outcomes, that it supports our students' mental health, and it benefits not just the students who take those accommodations or need those accommodations. So they can often reveal a better way to teach. Accommodations can show us this kind of flexibility, show us how to use these kinds of UDL principles. That flexible learning and assessment can strengthen our education and prepare students, again, for that real world workplaces. Because our students are going to be these future professionals, whatever it might be that they do. So our inclusive education is going to help build our inclusive societies. Without these supports, students might have more difficulty reaching these kinds of goals. So it's not just impacting the students themselves. And when we think about the self, we're not just ourselves, we're ourselves, our friends, our family, our community. It's not just us. Okay. So before we go through a couple more strategies, I wanted to center us here, focus a little bit more with this fictional case study of Birdie. Birdie is a third-year student with anxiety, ADHD, and chronic migraines. While she is a strong student, these invisible disabilities affect her ability to meet course expectations. While she's registered with the disability office, she often hesitates to seek out these kinds of accommodations. Specifically, in Professor Fern's advanced writing course, there are several dominant practices that create barriers for her. So things like having a very strict attendance policy. I put pop quizzes for drama. I don't like to speak in absolutes, but I don't think that many people give pop quizzes anymore. I think that's, yeah. So I crossed it out, but it's still there just for drama. He gets pop quizzes that are worth 15%, quite a bit of their final grade. No recordings of lectures are allowed. You have to be there if you want to get that lesson. All assignments due by midnight on the due dates, no exceptions. And then participation is only based on speaking in class. So Birdie begins experiencing increased migraine frequency, making attendance difficult. When present, the fluorescent lights, fast lecture pace overwhelm her. Her ADHD can make it difficult to challenging to process information quickly. And then that also affects her ability to participate spontaneously in discussions. So her anxiety spikes when she's called upon unexpectedly. And this is despite having her accommodations. But Professor Fern maintains that these policies are necessary for academic rigor. The real world won't make applications. Making exceptions wouldn't be fair to other students. And then the awful, if you can't keep up, maybe this course isn't for you. The impact is that Birdie's grade drops despite understanding the material. Birdie stops attending regularly because of the migraines, anxiety, mental health condition, deteriorates from the stress, considers dropping the course, delaying graduation, confidence in academic ability plummets, and then she feels isolated and unsupported. I try to come up with like a big, like, what turns like Professor Fern, like a ghost comes to him at night or something, like, what is that called? Charles Dickens.
A Christmas
The
Carol.
Christmas tree, yeah. But instead I just went with what we're doing here. That Professor Fern's shift begins when he attends a UDL workshop, where a panel of students described how traditional policies felt like academic quicksand for those with invisible disabilities. One student's story in particular about choosing between attending class with a migraine versus potentially failing a pop quiz mirrored Birdie's situation in a way that was very uncomfortable for Professor Fern. A disabilities coordinator then challenged Fern's notion of fairness, arguing that fairness isn't everyone getting the same thing, it's everyone getting what they need to be successful. Later, Birdie's grades, he's reviewing her grades alongside evidence of her really strong work. And he realizes that his policies weren't weeding out what he considered weak students, but were instead filtering out resilient students. The Learning and Teaching Center helped him reframe rigor as instead engagement depth. And then he questioned, what if flexibility isn't lowering standards, but instead adding these unnecessary hurdles for students? They start redesigning the course, not just for Birdie, but anyone who's ever hid behind a silence, fearing that their needs made them less than in the classroom. Professor Fern starts with small changes, pre-posting slides, recorded lectures to let Birdie or other students prep for class in advance, review them after class, review them at their own pace. Pop quizzes vanished. Instead, they were replaced by scheduled knowledge checks with very clear rubrics in terms of that expectation. So students aren't left answering or questioning why and how am I completing these assignments. When the migraine struck, she was able to use extension days for using excused work, taking a little bit more time to complete assignments. All of these kinds of things that we've talked about, they work by promoting equity, by normalizing that kind of flexibility. It gives students agency to manage their time. It ensures fairness with these extension days. And it also builds in, again, those real world skills like prioritization and time management. Fern considered if there were other multiple ways that allowed students to choose how they show what they've learned, rather than requiring everyone to demonstrate knowledge in the same exact way. Recognizing that students have different strengths, preferences, and needs, and that learning can be expressed in many different ways. So like differences with essays, presentations, maybe a project, some sort of reflective assignment. So for Birdie, that maintained her performance while managing health, build confidence, self-advocacy, feeling valued in the class. Overall, they saw greater engagement in the class, reduced stress, stronger community. Dr. Fern was able to deepen student insight. They found fewer needs to accommodate students because all of their students were accommodated, and they were able to give more authentic assessments. This helped empower the learners in the class, reduce the stigma, increase support seeking, workplace readiness, again, thinking about that future. And these proactive, flexible designs benefited all. So there's lots of ways for us to consider UDL, and it's important for us to consider why UDL. Later in the series, we're going to have some more specifics and maybe some workshops. I wanted to leave you with maybe 3 more concrete, immediately actionable steps that you could consider doing. So first could just be to audit your course material for inclusive design. So just starting with just taking a check-in, where am I right now? What am I doing? Reviewing your syllabus for maybe different statements, Is the syllabus feel more like this big legal document, or is it something that's encouraging, welcoming the students to the class? Trying to see maybe where you can build in some flexibility from the start. Checking even just like assignment instructions. Are they clear? Are they available in multiple formats? Maybe adding a mental health resource section to a course site. Another thing that you could consider is creating multiple support pathways. So setting up both in-person, virtual office hours. That can be helpful for some students, and that can be, I don't want to ever call anything easy because it depends on who you are, but just adding a Zoom link to your office hours or just posting where you are during office hours. Creating anonymous feedback form for students to share concerns, sharing information again about campus mental health supports, and then also building a supportive course team. I hesitated to add in giving more work for the TAs to do, but at least giving them some resources, like thinking about the class team. Like on my Canvas, I always have, please welcome our class team. There's me, there's our TAs, there's, if you're in 104, 105, Jordan, our textbook rep, Dr. Lynch, and kind of like giving a little introduction to all of our touch points in the classroom. But at least like sharing accommodation best practices with the TAs, including mental health awareness tips with the TAs, especially since sometimes the students can feel more comfortable approaching the TAs, a fellow student, than approaching their professors, who can sometimes seem really big and scary. And then reflective assignments, entry essays, I think we'll leave that for next time. It's really fun though. It's a really fun way to get the students engaged at the beginning of class, a really great way to get them engaged all the way towards the end of the semester, and a really great way for them to think about their learning, what they bring to the class. I know that doesn't mean anything since I'm not saying what the assignment is, but we'll come back to that. So last thing, UDL action. I have 3 steps here, just thinking about these kinds of things that you can do. So one, just reflecting maybe if you're not sure maybe where to start with making these changes in the class or adding to the class. Just one, reflect. Is there a UDL principle that resonated most with your current teaching challenges, or something that maybe resonates most with what you currently do, something you're already engaged in? So whether it's engagement, representation, or action and expression. Choosing one strategy from today's session to explore further, maybe a cognitive load management technique, maybe something with helping normalize help seeking, or maybe some sort of statement in the syllabus. And then just commit, maybe before our next section, sometime over the summer, really any time is fine. Just try to implement something, one thing, just like something small that you can try to do to add to your class. Because something small, especially if it's intentional, I think that important part there is the intentional, can really have a big impact on the students' learning. So even just that one small thing is great. So implementing one of these chosen strategies, set up some sort of goal, ask yourself, what do you want to change about the students, that important why, and then maybe even doing your own 1-minute reflection. Okay, this is just a QR code to that folder again. These 2 resources are just echoing the ones that Jen shared, the CAST UDL guidelines. This one, Think UDL podcast, thinking about multiple means of providing information. If anyone wants podcasts, likes podcasts, that's a great podcast with instructors talking about their experiences with UDL, things that have worked. And then this is also a book, 100 Ways to Teach All Learners, paperback by Whitney H. Rapp. So 100 different strategies that you could pick one to get started with. And I also like that it focuses on different levels of learners. Sometimes it's fun to incorporate things that are made for grade school students into this kind of space. Okay, we wanted it.
Okay, all right, so we didn't leave a whole lot of time for questions, but we do have the room for another half hour. So if anyone has any questions, we are happy to answer them, or you can always reach out to at DRD. Does anyone have any questions right now?
Does anyone have anything they want to try?
Okay, well, thank you very much for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you all again in September. Yes, thank you to everyone who came online as well. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Julie. I thought it worked for you before.
It did, but I lost it.
Okay.
I don't know where it goes.
Then later on, you'll find like 8 tabs of the exact same thing. You're like,
I did email a PDF of these yesterday, so if you lose it again, it is in the slides. You can always reach out to me again. I think we can shut down.
I always like how you present the information and like, here's a collection of all of the places where we've gathered this, and it's sorted logically as opposed to here's like 8,000 links. Good luck.
Yeah, well, I do have 8,000 links on that one slide, but
labeled and sorted.
yes.
That's what I need.
The last comments were all thank you, so okay.
So what do you think of EDI in the context of ACB?